Loneliness is dangerous, literally dangerous for you, and you must do something about it, and you must overcome those distortions and recognize that they are distortions.
Today, I'm joined by internationally renowned psychologist Guy Winch. He advocates for integrating the science of emotional health into our daily lives.
Chronic loneliness is very dangerous. Chronic loneliness is associated with early death and morbidity. It is found in research to do the equivalent damage to your long-term health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Whoa. 15 cigarettes a day is what chronic loneliness does to your body. Now, anyone who's smoking 15 cigarettes a day, hopefully somebody around them would go like, dude, enough with the cancer. Come on, let's do something. But no one says it about loneliness because we're not aware that it's that dangerous. But it is that dangerous because we're social animals. When we are lonely, our body responds as if it's under attack because we.
Greetings and welcome to the Dr. Espen podcast. I'm your host, Espen. Today, I'm joined by internationally renowned psychologist Guy Winch. He advocates for integrating the science of emotional health into our daily lives. So this is a conversation that's going to, I think, be really useful if you've recognized that the quality of your life equals the quality of your emotions. And certain emotions makes us feel obviously not so good and other ones make us feel much better. So where do they come from? How can we heal? And or how can we live even more extraordinary lives? Guy Winch's science-based health books has translated into 30 languages now. He's got 3 TED Talks out there, which we'll talk about in a moment, which in total has collected over 35 million views. He's the author of the book Wrong, Do Right, Emotional Health Newsletter, and the Dear Guy column for TED. So the Dear Guy, G-U-I column for TED. And he's the co-host of the Ambie Nominated Dear Therapists podcast from iHeartRadio as well. So today we're going to have some great conversations, lean in and take a big breath. And let's welcome to the stage, Guy Winch. How are you today, sir?
I'm well, and thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for joining us all the way from New York. Tell us, why is it so important to understand or understand emotions, and what is it that's led you to these amazing breakthroughs?
Well, emotions dictate our lives. In essence, they are responsible, or they are involved, rather, in every decision we make, every relationship we have, everything we do is informed by our emotions. So they're incredibly important and impactful. And they're also very impactful in ways that we tend to not realize because they operate both consciously and unconsciously. So there's a lot that they do for us. They're our companions and our guides in life. And so we need to get very familiar with them for that reason.
I like that you mentioned that, companions and guides. Okay. I used to say to my patients, and I still do often, that the question is, why do we do what we do? Why does someone have an addiction, or why does someone yell at their children, or even the positive actions or inactions either way? And I always used to say we act based on emotions, not just the thoughts. If someone wants to buy themselves a new Ferrari, it's normally not an intellectual decision. It's normally an emotional decision. What are your thoughts on that?
I think every thought and every decision, rather, is an emotional decision. I think there's research about people who had certain kinds of brain injuries in which they were disconnected from their emotions. I'm recalling this from many years ago from some kind of undergraduate study or graduate study, but there were cases in which people were hurt very specifically in the brain in ways that they were not in touch with their emotions. They were unable to make decisions in those moments, because if you don't have any emotional valence this way or that way, then what are you going to have for dinner? What show are you going to watch on TV now? And which friend are you going to call? All of those are emotional decisions. And so they're absolutely necessary, and they are embedded in truly everything we do.
It makes sense. Do you feel, and what's your research and also your experience as a psychologist over so many years now, when it comes to emotions being stored in the body? Let's say that we talk about the imprint period, early childhood. There could be trauma, there could be loss, there could be pain. What do you find in your practice and during your work when it comes to healing these emotions on a subconscious and also conscious level?
So that's a big question. I'm going to break it down a bit because there are different parts to that. Psychologists, what we tend to be interested in, psychology, the typical question is, well, tell me about your mother. Tell me about your childhood. Tell me about those things. Why that's interesting is because this is our first exposure to the world. This is how, and we don't know anything when we are born, when we're starting out. So we think that the relationships we have are relationships. We are learning patterns of communicating, of interacting, of thinking that are then laid down. And those are the patterns that we have for life. And sometimes those patterns are helpful and sometimes they're not. And you want to understand where those patterns get set up. We tend to do very similar things. We tend to have similar relationships. We tend to be similar people, not exactly the same, but we tend to bring the same self to our different relationships with different people. Where did those patterns get set up? How is it that we relate the way we do? Why do some of us have trust issues? Why do some of us have attachment issues? Why do some of us feel very anxious about connection, even if we crave it, while others do not? All of that is set up in childhood. And so you have to be informed of where a pattern was created and then therefore what it is. And it's not that you can't change the pattern, but you can change it much more easily once you know where it came from and why it is the way it is at the moment.
I love this cause and effect. And is it true? And what's your experience in regards to the imprint period? The first 7 years are the most critical in terms of creating this blueprint of life.
It's more than, really the understanding is that we continue to develop and evolve throughout our lives. In other words, things keep happening. Now, the influence, it's a little bit, I'm saying this for the first time and it might sound ridiculous, but it's a little bit Amazon book rankings. They're weighted. In other words, the last hour has the biggest weight, but then the weight of where you ranked in the day, then the week, then the month, then the year, etc. So there are different influences in different periods in your life, somehow more weighty than others and some less so. But there's always some kind of weight coming on us or pulling us in different directions in that kind of way. What can be difficult is if we want to change a pattern, then it's an urge, it's an instinct we have to default to that pattern. So changing patterns of behavior or changing emotional reactions requires a ton of mindfulness because you actually have to be thoughtful all the time. Otherwise, you default back into the regular pattern. So that's where those things get set up and why they're so important. But it also tells us a little bit about why they're hard to change. Because if we're not paying attention, we're just going to revert back to doing the thing that we're most familiar with, useful or not.
Exactly my thought. So how does one break the pattern of being one's old self? Let's say we've got a habit of complaining, or we've got a habit of emotional eating. We've got a habit of drinking alcohol when shouldn't. We've got a habit of not exercising because we believe that it's too difficult. It could be any of these habits or patterns. How does one break the habit or the pattern of being ourselves or the old self?
Right. Well, let's use a specific example. You mentioned complaining. My first book is called The Squeaky Wheel. It's about the psychology of complaining. I will go with that example.
Perfect.
Here's the thing about complaining. This does get set up in childhood. But remember, when we are children, we are really helpless. We do not have a lot of agency. We do not have a lot of resources. We do not have authority, responsibility, and ability to do what we want. So if things happen to us, the best thing we can sometimes do is just vent about it. Just complain because we're actually helpless to affect change. We're not empowered. Now that habit can keep going. And then when you're an adult and negative things happen, you default to just feeling helpless and complaining about it because that's what your experience was in childhood. But you are not helpless now. You are not unempowered. It's fine to complain to get support for a moment. But then you can actually do something about it. But people feel very passive and helpless. And you literally have to challenge them and say, but why aren't you doing something? Well, what can I do? Well, have you thought about what you can do? Well, not really. I mean, there's always actions that can be taken. There are always variables that are in our control. You know, another example, I have a very domineering boss. I mean, I don't, I'm self-employed, but let's say someone does. They have a domineering boss and they had a domineering parent, and their response to the boss is to like shut down and go within themselves and retreat and withdraw, because there was no point in arguing with a domineering parent when you're a child. But there is a point in setting limits with the boss. That it's not the best interaction to have that interaction, but to have that response to your boss. But you have to catch that, understand that the feelings that you're having of feeling victimized or feeling put upon or feeling criticized or feeling, those are accurate feelings, but you can actually do something about them. The feeling that is not accurate is the helplessness that you feel with it. That is historical, not current.
Wonderful. Over the last, say, 5 to 7 years, the world has gone through a drastic change. We went through a lot of pain. We could not do the things that we love to do often. We couldn't go out. We couldn't eat. We couldn't sometimes even go to our friend's house for a gathering. We couldn't see our parents. We were forced into separation and we were locked down. This has had a massive effect on psychological well-being and emotional well-being for many people. What trends have you seen in terms of the mental health pandemic and or the emotional health pandemic that's taking place after that? And where are we now?
So first of all, I'm so glad you're asking that question. I think it's so important. I can't tell you how many people have the attitude of pandemic, we're done with it. It's in the past. It was hugely traumatic, as you're saying. And to remind people, at the beginning, we weren't quite sure how we're coming out of it or whether we are coming out of it, whether the fabric of civil society would even hold. It's enough that the people who work in supermarkets and food markets decided they're no longer coming to work because it's too dangerous, and suddenly people can't get food. It would have been horrific. So it was a very, very scary thing. The thing that characterized it most was two things, was the isolation and the uncertainty, the anxiety. And for many, many people also getting sick. But I'm going to talk about just the psychological aspect of that. The isolation, being locked down or being forced to lock down, and the uncertainty, the anxiety of what's happening. Everything had to become virtual. There was people I know who didn't touch another soul for 3 to 4 months. Literally had no human contact, which is a human necessity. We do very badly without it. So it was very, very difficult. I think the pandemic did a few things. Number one, it brought the issue of emotional health, particularly things like loneliness and anxiety, home to a lot of people. I know that during the pandemic, I was getting a lot of talks to companies who wanted me to talk about employees and the emotional health of their employees, who previously has zero interest in the emotional health of their employees. And it's possible that now, again, have very little interest in the emotional health of their employees, but they were aware they needed to be at the time. So there was much more awareness and attention given. And I think at the beginning, there were people coming together in some kind of way. But I think thereafter, it's been quite divisive. I mean, certainly here in the US, it's divided people rather than bonded them. But I think the legacy it left us is a legacy of two things. First of all, you had a whole cohort, of kids who missed out on socializing in the most critical years of socializing for them, whether the younger kids that are socializing for the first time, the tweens and teens that's all their life and they got taken away from it. So we're dealing with kids who are having a lot of hiccups and interruptions. We're dealing with young adults, Gen Z, who came into the workplace and there wasn't one for them to go into, and the Great Resignation, then there was the hirings, then there was quiet quitting, then there was all this tumult in the workplace and this was their first exposure. And so they had a very rude introduction to that transition from college to work. And I think for a lot of people, it created a lot of anxiety and uncertainty, the feeling of life can seem normal, but in an instant, the whole world can change. And we are in quite a tumultuous time geopolitically today. And so I think that anxiety is still playing for a lot of people, just this general sense of uncertainty about the world. Yeah.
What can one do now? If that was a situation, like I saw a lot of my patients and students, they were wanting to be held and wanting to be together and have quality time. Like we know, when we study health, nutrition and exercise is important, but what seems to be even more important is this social circle, this community feeling, this belonging, this family vibe. If one has gone through challenges, and even if one hasn't during the COVID period, what can one do now to really improve one's social well-being?
So social well-being is about connection, and connection is a human need. You mentioned the need to belong. It's a very fundamental human need. It's not a need most people typically think of because they think about hunger, thirst, intimacy, what have you, but the need to belong. We are social animals. We evolved in tribes. We need to feel seen and recognized by our tribes. And we have more than one tribe today. We belong in different tribes, our family, our workplace, our social circle, our amateur sports, what have you. But that is a very strong need. And loneliness today is truly epidemic. It is at higher levels than we've seen previously. And it is especially high among young people. It is especially high among teens, young adults, early 20s and early 30s. Those are the ages that are most lonely today. We tend to associate loneliness to elderly people living alone. But in fact, the happiness curve of life is a U-curve. We get happier earlier in life than we have adulthood, which is rough. But then towards older age, we start getting happier again. And that cohort is much less lonely. It's the younger people who are really suffering from loneliness. And one of the reasons they're suffering in addition to that is because their lives have gone online and virtual so significantly that they are much more likely to reach out virtually, much more likely to interact virtually. And those are, by definition and by research, less satisfying. You can have a good bond via text, via video call, but it is stronger in person. You have the tactile sense of touching someone, of hugging someone, of sitting close to them. If you're women, of looking at one another. If you're men, it's more shoulder to shoulder. But you are close, you are interacting, you're experiencing things together. that is missing still. And the more we are migrating to virtual lives rather than in-person connection, the worse that's going to get.
So, Guy, what do we do? Do we jump online and find local communities and reach out? Do we call our friends and say, let's catch up? I mean, I say to some of my community, we create these network and events and opportunities to come and gather and learn. And we do breath work and connections and personal development type work. But I also say it's each individual's responsibility to make an effort to reach out and to try to make these relationships, sometimes new ones, a priority. What are some of your top steps to say if someone right now is recognizing, like even for myself, for many, many years, I've worked extremely hard. I spent a lot of time in front of the computer. And some would say that the entrepreneurial journey is somewhat of a lonely one. What are your top tips?
Sorry.
Yeah, right.
Overreacting. Please go on. That's true.
No, it's not an overreaction. It's a beautiful response. I couldn't concur more. What are your thoughts on the matter?
There are a lot of things that are very lonely that we tend to think are great. And entrepreneurial aspirations are one of them. You know what another one of them is? Childbirth. When women give birth, they are extremely lonely for a few months because they're not interacting with adults much. And even if, there's a partner that comes back at certain points, they are alone with the baby who needs things from them all the time. So loneliness is really problematic. Here are two things that tend to hold people back from doing what you're saying they need to do, which you're completely right about. People do need to reach out. People do need to seek these kinds of meetings. If you're holding events where people can come and interact and meet one another and have a very positive, connective vibe, that's super important. People should avail themselves of that because that's very, very useful. What holds people back are two things. Loneliness, once we have it, creates two problematic perceptual distortions. It makes us feel that the people around us care much less about us than they actually do. In other words, we'll even think about our really good friend or close family member, but no, we haven't spoken to them for a couple of weeks and they haven't reached out. They probably don't care about me at all. And we have this way of discounting how much people care about us because we are so focused on what they didn't do. We will not pay attention to the fact that, but I haven't reached out to them in a couple of weeks either.
Yeah.
So that's the one thing that happens. And the second thing that happens, it makes us feel that the relationships we do have aren't that worthwhile anyway. Because we're feeling so bad and so raw, we're discounting and like, yeah, we can hang out, but so what? So it's not going to be that much fun, or they're probably not going to be that into it. And so why should I bother? Why should I bother and go to Dr. Espen's meeting? Because people won't be interested in talking to me, is going to be the thought of a lonely person. Now, that is a distortion. It's not entirely untrue. It's just exaggerated. So there might be some truth to it, but you're feeling it way more strongly than you should. And you're being much more pessimistic than you need to be. So there's a way with loneliness. You have to do an override. You have to override the gut instinct that's telling you, don't go. It won't be fun. It won't be good. You have to override that and put yourself in these positions and put yourself in the right mindset once you are in those positions to connect, which is difficult.
I'm taking notes while I'm truth bumping / goosebumping. This is so good. Oh, thank you. You know what? You just literally described my father. He is a lovely, lovely, beautiful man, and he's so sensitive, empathetic, but he is very much in the mode of no one loves me, so I can't be bothered. And it's been 20 years I've called and I've said, hey, Dad, call sometimes. Call. He does call when he's drunk, which is another conversation we might have at some point, but he doesn't call when he's sober. It doesn't happen. 20 years. And I say, I love you so much. I miss speaking with you. I want to hear about your life. Tell me what's going on. He says, yeah, no worries. I'll call you tomorrow. Just never calls. And when I speak to him, he literally will demonstrate the two traits that you just talked about.
Right, because he probably feels that he's burdening you and you're busy and you're a busy person. And it's terrible. But and I'm going to say something scary, but I need to say it as a kick in the ass for people who are listening who might be lonely, potentially your dad. Chronic loneliness is very dangerous. Chronic loneliness is associated with early death and morbidity. It is found in research to be the equivalent damage to your long-term health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. 15 cigarettes a day is what chronic loneliness does to your body. Now, anyone who's smoking 15 cigarettes a day, hopefully somebody around them would go like, dude, enough with the cancer. Come on, let's do something. But no one says it about loneliness because we're not aware that it's that dangerous, but it is that dangerous because we're social animals. When we are lonely, our body responds as if it's under attack because we associate it with not having our tribe around us. And if we didn't have our tribe around us, we wouldn't survive. And so it's a threatening thing psychologically and consequently physiologically, because the two are connected. And so loneliness is dangerous, literally dangerous for you. and you must do something about it, and you must overcome those distortions and recognize that they are distortions. And when your son is telling you, hey, I want to talk to you, you reach out to me once in a while, it'll be good for you to do that, then do that.
Yeah. Lovely. Okay, so listeners and viewers, this is a question for the self. Where are we not? If we are lonely, if we're feeling separated, if we're feeling disconnected, where can we, in this moment, decide to take some actions to reach out to our loved ones, to our community and say, hey, I'm here. Do you want to catch up? Do something fun and actually make an effort? Because even though it may not be our fault, it is still the fact that we are the people that can make the change. We can't just sit and wait. We have to make an effort and actually get amongst communities and try and get out there and see if we can connect with like-minded people so we can disconnect from being disconnected, I should say.
You said something important. Do you mind if I just want to follow up on something you said?
Please.
It was very important. You
Please.
said to reach out and say, hey, what's going on? Let's get together. Let's do something fun. That would be ideal. That would be very good. Unfortunately, when people are lonely, what they're more likely to say is, I know you probably are busy and you don't have time for me, but et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Exactly right. Not the most appetizing. Or they might text and say something, and even if they intend it in a nice way, like, oh, we haven't spoken in so long, without an emoji, the other person's going to read it as, we haven't spoken in so long, as an accusatory thing. And because you're feeling so raw when you're lonely, it's natural to come out in a way that's either kind of self-deprecating or a little resentful. You really want to watch that.
Yeah.
You really want to make it inviting. What you said was inviting. Let's have fun. You can't read that wrong. Let's have fun. So it was a perfect thing to say. And I'm just emphasizing that because especially when so many of our communications are electronic, you do have the chance to read them before you send them and to see, can I read that negatively? And if you can, a smiley face.
I love that. The way we write things and the way it's received is not always the same. Was it George Bernard Shaw that said the biggest problem with communication is the perception that it has taken place effectively?
I don't know.
Something like that.
Perhaps I'm not great with those things, but yes.
Yeah, it was something like that. It's like what we express is not always how it's been received. Wonderful. Okay, so we have a strategy and then we know what to do. We could potentially do that at the earliest convenience if relevant. And we want to do that with the discernment that what we're sending could not be perceived in a negative way. We want to be positive, non-blaming, non-judgmental, and non-self-deprecating as discussed. This is wonderful. Okay, I would like to ask you a question, and this is more of a question going back in time. There's research out there that shows that when the child is born, when we are born, when our children are born, there is a period of time when we're coming into the human experience that we're not aware that we're not in our mother's womb. And there's also the importance of being held. We see there's a direct correlation between infant death rates and the likelihood of infant death and infant illness goes up significantly if we're born and we're not held by our mother. Have you got any research or anything you want to share in regards to that when it comes to physical touch and actually being connected in that way?
So yes, but I'm going to start with actually the newborn experience, which is what you're saying, that this started happening during I think it was the Second World War, could have been the first, but because again, it's been a while since my graduate school days. There were a lot of, obviously, babies in orphanages, and there were a lot of them. And we had this big dorm of babies and two nurses who were busy, they had these contraptions to feed the baby, etc. It was all like assembly line kind of, let's take care of these babies' needs. And babies started dying. And they found out that if there's no tactile sensation of the baby being held, the baby will not thrive. They did experiments with, I think it was chimps, monkeys or chimps, think chimps, let's say, but newborn chimps, again, given bottles and a wireframe figure of a parent, but it was wireframe. Those chimps had a lot of social problems when they grew up. They couldn't socialize well. They decided to put some strips of fur on the wireframe figure of the mother figure for the chimps, and just touching the fur corrected that. And those chimps were much less likely to have disturbed social relations. That tactile sensation at the beginning is hugely important. We know now when babies are preemies, even they might be in an incubator, they are held because that holding is so critical. And these are stages of life in which we don't know the difference between us and the environment. We can't tell, but that's how deeply important the tactile and the feeling, that sensation, especially when it's skin to skin, which is super important for human babies. And that's why the baby always goes on the mother. And so the skin touches the skin, etc. As adults, we need that tactile communication as well. We need to be touched. We need to be held. Now, yes, there are some people who do not like being touched, who do not like being held. That can happen. And if you're one of those people who do not like that, the sensation is just unpleasant for you, that's fine. You might need closeness that's more emotional rather than just tactile or that physical dimension to it. But feeling intimacy is hugely important for us. Intimacy, when I talk to couples, sometimes they'll talk about sex, and I always ask, are you talking about sex that's not there? Or are you talking about intimacy that's not there? They have overlap, but they're also distinct. The intimacy is we sit on the couch and we hold hands, we put our arms around one another, we hug, we give each other a kiss hello, a kiss goodbye at the beginning, at the end of the day, etc. Those are intimate acts. We caress each other, etc. And they're couples who, other than, sex, which happens at whatever frequency, there's no touching. And those couples can feel a distance. They can feel a little bereft because there's more to that connection that has the tactile and the physical. Those are important beyond the sexual.
This is massive. Okay, so where does the 5 love languages come in? Have you noticed that some people are more needing of physical touch than others? I mean, you mentioned some people don't like to get touched. I don't know. What pops up in my head is maybe that's trauma from the earliest stages of childhood where they weren't held. Who knows? But what are your thoughts on that in terms of needs? Like, let's say we have a couple now, they're listening, and maybe the husband or the wife, male, female, whichever, is now recognizing that, I don't think we have the level of intimacy that we could thrive with. What are your recommendations or thoughts on the matter if someone's listening and they find this to be quite relevant?
Well, okay, so we all do need it, but how much each of us needs it in a certain moment in our lives can vary. So they might not have enough intimacy, but their needs might still be different. So the best thing a couple needs to do is to talk very openly about, I'll share what my feelings and needs are, you share your feelings and needs. And once you can put those things on the table, then you can start to look for what the areas of overlap and compromise, negotiation, what have you, or even understanding why you used to be so affectionate and now you're not. What's different? And it could be what's different. Well, we've been together for 30 years. It's less exciting. But it's also probably not about less exciting, but about because I get home tense and you're always busy. And once couples start to talk, they can unpack much more about what might be standing in their way. But to do that, the most important thing is that you have to be able to, and it feels risky, but you have to take the risk of being emotionally vulnerable and saying, this is how I feel. This is what I would like. Even if that you think the partner might not, but I'm here. And the partner might be, well, I'm here. And okay, how do we come toward one another? What's the best we can do for one another? One partner might I need more of this, and the other, I need more space. So how do we find some kind of compromise that addresses both our needs?
This is wonderful. So if that's relevant to you, take a note. If you're able to, pause this podcast or this interview, this episode right now, and take a note into what questions do I need to ask and sit down and have a conversation with in regards to my partner or my family. And then also something that I found very useful, and I think we've debunked this thought now in many ways, but the thought used to be, I go to a psychologist once there is something pathological. I go to a psychologist once there is something wrong with me or my relationships are broken down. But I think we're past that now. And I think it's more often people go to therapists when they realize that they want to have a better relationship before it breaks down. And so, for example, I have coaches and I have mentors and I have psychologists and therapists that I go and see regularly, not so because I'm broken, but because, hey, there is something that I would like to express and would like to have some feedback on. And, after a session like this, it could be a podcast or it could be a therapy session. Guess what? I'm very likely to go and sit down with a loved one and have this conversation and as such improve my relationships. What are your recommendations to, say, couples and individuals out there that may or may not have therapists and or this type of intervention or opportunity in their lives?
So here's the interesting thing. I'm a therapist, and here's the interesting thing about therapy. It's not the answer for 99% of the people, because therapy is not affordable, geographically available just in terms of the medical care system for most people. It's just not. It's a privilege for some, and it can be beneficial for some, but it's not the answer in general. Now, if you can afford to do it, great. Hopefully you have a good one, because therapy, some people are useful, some people less. So as though it's not just, yay, I'm going, but hopefully, because what we know works in therapy is the fit between the therapist and the client. That fit is the active ingredient that needs to work. So you can go to somebody who's great, but if you're not a good fit for them and your issues are not, it's not going to be successful. To that end, I'm just going to mention this. It's going to sound like a plug, but it's actually relevant. You mentioned at the beginning that I have a podcast called Dear Therapists. You can get it anywhere you get your podcast. That podcast is live sessions. Each episode, it's myself and a co-host. We choose a letter from people who write in. Each episode includes the following. It starts with us reading the letter to one another. Somebody's writing about a problem. They have all kinds of problems, sometimes couples, mother-daughter, individuals, whatever they are. Then she's also a therapist. We'll have a quick discussion about it as therapists. But when we get this kind of referral, it's usually these issues. Then we'll bring the person in for a live session in which myself and the co-therapist have not discussed what's happening or where we're going. We're doing it together. We're in different locations. She's on the West Coast. I'm on the East Coast of the US. But we will have that session and navigate it together to find out what's going on and to have a therapy session. We don't call it therapy, but it's a session. And at the end of it, we will give them actionable advice in multiple steps that they have to do within a week. And then they have to report back, and we'll hear the report back, and then we'll have a summary at the end. So within each episode, you get a full hour of somebody coming to two therapists with a problem, how the therapists think about the problem, how the therapists conduct a session with them about that problem, why that session often goes in a very different direction than what the problem was, because that's how therapy works, and what happens when they tell the person what they then need to do, what happens when they do it, and what are the therapist's thoughts. So we did it because it's our way of democratizing therapy. It's a different issue every week. You will learn something about yourself, whether you have that issue or not, because therapy is like that. It just brings out generalities and truths about people. And we did it, even though it was a ton of work, because we wanted people to get the benefit who couldn't afford or who couldn't find or who couldn't have the time to go to therapy themselves. And so it's just another way people can get that kind of information and get the therapy vicariously, as it were, through the person that we're dealing with in that week.
I love it. You said it's going to sound like a plug, but it's not. I honestly think it should be, because some people might really benefit from that. So imagine this, you have a problem with depression or anxiety or relationships or whatever. Can someone go to the podcast called Dear Therapists and actually look for different topics and choose that?
I think we have 80 episodes, something like that, 80. You just scroll through, and each one is titled with the name of the person. I should say the fake name, obviously, of the person. Fake names, everything. And then what the issue is, the over-demanding parent, the husband's affair, the sister that gets all the attention and they don't. It's like just life problems, or just an array of life, just very down-to-earth, real stuff. And then you choose something that seems relevant to you.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I think this is awesome. And you consider it's like a live case study. There's a live problem. It's highly likely we know there's no problem that person is facing that other people aren't facing. So there's always going to be relevant to some people. And then they get to sit and listen to the problem, maybe recognize their own patterns or situations within that problem. They get to then get not advice. It's not a therapy session, even though you could get tremendous value, such as you're getting therapy from the session. You then get the advice, what to do it within 7 days. And I could imagine that the people listening, if they have a similar concern, some of those bits of advice, even though not directly to them, would be very useful for them.
For sure. And also, because we're therapists, we do go back with almost every person and explore some of these childhood patterns. And then you can learn about childhood patterns that might be relevant for you, even if the outcome wasn't.
Okay. I want to ask you about the combination of thoughts and emotions. Some people say the thoughts are most important because they're creating the emotion. And other people say, no, the emotion is more important because the emotion creates the thought. What are your thoughts on the two?
I don't see them as being in competition. I see them as they work together. Thoughts influence our emotions influence our thoughts. Here's how. Our emotions can influence our thoughts unconsciously and consciously in obvious ways. But thoughts can influence emotions. For example, emotional regulation, which is the psychological term for managing your emotions, how you regulate and manage your feelings, which we do all the time, right? You're feeling irritable, but you have to go into a meeting, so you kind of clear your head or you distract yourself with something. But one of the most powerful emotional regulation techniques that we have is called reframing, is a simple term. It's cognitive reappraisal, but reframing is a simple term. Reframing is a way to take an emotion about something that happened and reframe, get a different perspective on the event, which is a thought. You're just thinking about it in a different way. And that thought in a different way will change the emotion that you're having about it. So that's thought changing the emotion. For example, you're really upset because you're overworked and your boss just came and landed a whole big mess of stuff you have to do because he's going on holiday tomorrow. So he gets to go on holiday and now you're stuck doing his work and you're so upset and you're so irritable because you're already stressed out. That's the emotion. What you can do in that moment is pause, take a deep breath. The whole breathing thing's super important. And I know that you emphasize that a lot, super important. But you do that, you can calm yourself a bit. And then you start to think, okay, But what are the opportunities here? First of all, if I do all of this, he'll be grateful. And certainly when I want to take a vacation, he's more likely to grant it. But also, some of these things is putting me in front of the higher-ups because I'm doing it for him, which is a great opportunity to network and to impress people that I want to be able to impress. And here I get to work on some skill sets that I haven't really worked on, so that's good. And the fact that he delegated it to me, there are 4 other people on the team, that's a good call out right there. Maybe I don't feel so bad about that. So you just thought about the upsetting, aggravating thing, gave it a pivot in thought that then changed your emotion. So this is how they affect one another. Emotions usually are stronger just because evolutionary-wise, those pathways have been there for much longer, a prefrontal cortex more recent, etc. But one can impact the other, and they can do that in both directions.
Oh, this is excellent. Okay. Yeah, I get the reframe part. I mean, we use reframing so much. I say change the meaning, change your life. You could look at something and say, well, that happened to me, so I'm a victim of it. My boss is an asshole, and I have to do all this work now, and it's really bad, but you can't get around it. So you can choose to, one, stay where you are and be a victim of it and go through a series of negative emotions that'll impact the quality of your work and impact the quality of your life. Or you recognize that it's not happening to you, it's happening for you. So then you ask a different set of questions. All the things that you mentioned. And I think this is such a powerful concept because, well, if you're in that situation, you might not be able to get out of the situation. So at least don't suffer through it. I think this is a really powerful opportunity. So listeners and viewers right now, is there a situation in your life right now that you could reframe from it's negative to, okay, I'm in this situation. How is it happening for me? What is the reframe? What is the positive? And if that's the case, and if this is relevant, again, if you have the chance, pause this episode and write down those positive things. You can go back and listen to what Guy just said, and you'll start to feel better, and you start to think better, and you start to produce better work, and you'll have a better quality of life. So remember, we can always choose to reframe any negative situation. It doesn't mean that we place ourselves in harm, of course, but it means if you're in a situation that you're not appreciating, there is opportunity for more appreciation. I love that. Anything you want to add?
Yes. You know, the one thing we all need to do to be able to do that, we have to disconnect the autopilot. Because we tend to, especially when we're busy, we tend to just go from this to this to this to this to this to this to this. We're not pausing to reflect, to think about what's going on, to do that work. So you have to pause and take stock. You have to pause and take your emotional temperature. When you're having big feelings, get curious about them. Don't just let them flow through you in whichever way you do or bottle them up. Get curious about what they are. Are they useful? What can I learn from them? What can I do about them? Psychology in general, it's like it needs management. I say this thing that the human brain might be the most sophisticated machine in the universe, but it requires adult supervision. And we have to be the supervisor to our own brain in that way. We have to be the responsible adult in the room. Somebody has to look over and monitor and manage, and that has to be us to ourselves.
Thank you. Makes sense. Okay, I've got 3 questions for you. I want to quickly talk about AI, because you brought up something really amazing just before. We talked about disconnection. We talked about loneliness. We got some real great insight into loneliness and disconnection in essence, and also what we can do about it. So again, if you're listening to this, if this has been useful, you never know how far sharing this is going to help others. So if this is useful, please, at the end, share it as far and wide as you can, because you might not even change a life, maybe even save a life. Who knows? Let's talk about AI. There are kids programs out there now that are literally like spectacularly made with colors and it sounds, but it changes the frame every 1.5 seconds to keep the children stuck in that serotonin, dopamine, just continuously. They change the frame so the kids are absolutely addicted. And we take the iPad off the child and there's this tantrum because now they're disconnected from this addiction that they're experiencing. You mentioned young people, disconnection, loneliness, and so on and so forth. And not just young people, but there's a trend, as you mentioned. And then we have so much time in front of the screen, and now we have AI, and we have virtual reality and all these things. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And I would love, if you don't mind, Guy, tell us, what do we need to do right now for us who are spending a lot of time on the screen to make sure that we catch that before it really becomes a problem? Or even if it is a problem, what do we need to do about it?
I think we missed the train in terms of catching it, as it were, because it's just all over the place. But look, it's 2 things. It's AI doing that, but it's algorithms and social media doing the same thing, right? Like literally learning, they're tracking where you're looking and what's engaging you, even if you're not aware that that's engaging you. And then they're feeding you those things to keep you. So it's literally a sophisticated algorithm that humans can't understand that'll just keep us engaged. Now, I also thinking about the single parent of 3 young kids who needs to get home after a day of work and make dinner, and he or she cannot supervise everything. So here's an iPad, here's the TV, just because I can't do it all. I'm thinking about that person. Yes, you might need the iPad or the screen as a babysitter. That doesn't mean that you don't get to decide what's on that screen. In other words, it should not be a free-for-all. And you need to be very thoughtful about what the kids are watching. There are so many educational things, apps that are educational, that teach, and shows certainly, and official ones on streamers, on networks, on YouTube, on everything there. So if you have some time, you poor single parent who's working so hard, which I really feel for you, but if you have some time to just figure out, ask your friends, get what are the things that are good enough for my kids to watch. And that's what you have them watch. In other words, yes, the fact that you might need that or that you can't supervise every minute doesn't mean that you don't get to determine what kids are watching. And when it comes to phones, they should not have them until they're teenagers because there's no good. And if they need them for safety, a flip phone will do.
Thank you. I went to a seminar at my son's school, and there was a gentleman who said exactly the same thing. No phone until the teenage years. If you give it to them earlier, it will have a massive detriment on their psychology as they evolve. Okay, so fellow parents out there, what are we learning? It's about what they watch. We know that sometimes if we just have to, quote unquote, feel like we have to put them on the iPad, let them have the screen, we know that it creates the serotonin addiction. So it really matters more what they watch, okay? That it's conscious, that it's educational, and that it's something that's going to benefit us. And then also what I do, guys, to say, listen, I'll make a deal. My son's 6. I'll say, I'll make you a deal. You get to sit and you get to be on this iPad or play this game or whatever for 30 minutes. Okay, after 30 minutes, we're going to put it away, and then you can help me set the table, and then we can do our gratitude, and then we can eat together. So if it's okay with you, we're going to do 30 minutes, and when the alarm goes off, then you're going to turn the game off yourself, and then you're going to come and hang out with me. Maybe we can play for a bit, but I want you to put it away yourself without being angry and upset about it. Would you like to do that? And he goes, yes, I'm happy to do that. And then I say, go and enjoy it. And he goes and plays and has a great time. And the alarm goes off. Most times, not always, most times he'll be pretty okay with it. And other times he's like, I want to play more, but it depends on his blood sugar levels and so on and so forth. But I found that to be quite useful. So deciding the time and then obviously making sure that what they watch is right as well. Anything you want to add?
Yes, I really like that you do it that way. And because I think it should be some kind of interaction, if not a negotiation, not exactly a negotiation. You said them like, so if it's okay with you, which I'm sure you don't say to your kid when you're actually saying it, because it's not actually the question. So you said it there, but I knew you threw it in, and I'm like, you don't say that to your kid, which you don't, I'm sure. But the thing, because you're dictating it, you're saying this is, the one thing I would add is when the disengagement from the iPad, from the screen comes, and it's like, no, just more, and gaming especially, it's like, I would say to the kid, it's really, really difficult to stop once you start. But that's the deal. Mm-hmm. So I know this is very difficult, what I'm asking you to do now. I know it's going to be very frustrating. If you need to feel frustrated, if you need to have a cry, I don't know how old your kid is, if you need to have a cry, if you need to be upset, feel free to be upset for a little bit. But I'm going to give you a few minutes, and then you're going to come and help me set the table. So they're allowed to be frustrated and upset because it's hard. You're disconnecting them from, I was in the supermarket like a couple of months ago. And this woman was there with maybe a 5-year-old or 6-year-old who was gaming on something. And she was like, no, you can't do that. And she took it away, and the kids screamed, and the whole market broke into laughter because the skin at the top of their life, like, you don't understand. You are ruining my life. And everyone just lost it because the kid was like 6 and it was ruining her life in that moment. But but it was so loud and dramatic. But that's what it feels like. So it's okay to say it's going to feel like it's ruining your life, but you'll be okay. I know this is very difficult. The next time we do the 30 minutes, remember, it's really difficult to stop. So if you need to be upset for a bit, be upset for a bit, but then come join me.
That's been the challenge, not so much for me, but for other people. I have been pretty good at this, and that's boundaries. So when we say 30 minutes, we set the standard, that's the agreement, and then 30 minutes comes along, and then the little one goes, no, or they scream in the car until they get the phone. Right. For me, I've been really strict on this, lovingly assertive, as I call it. But I know, let's just say intimately to me, other people have not been as successful. So the child has actually overridden the boundaries of the parents. What are your thoughts on that?
Here's the thing about boundaries. When parents are setting boundaries with a kid, parents who live together, if parents are separated, then the kids learn that there are these rules here and these rules here, so it's okay. But if they're in the same household and mommy's rule is this and daddy's rule is that, or one parent's rule is this and the other parent's rule is that, I don't want to gender it, then that's confusing for the kid. And so if you're setting boundaries, you need to be united across caretakers. That's not just parents then. It's the nannies, it's the grandparents. The rules need to be consistent across caretakers. Here's the thing about boundaries that people get wrong. Less so sometimes with kids, but mostly when you're setting them with other adults. There are 2 steps to setting boundary. There are actually more, but I'm going to simplify. There are 2 steps to setting boundary. One is more important than the other. The step most people are familiar with is setting the boundary. Hey, when you do X, it bothers me. Please don't do X. Or this I don't like. Please don't do that. Setting the boundary people are familiar with. The less important step is setting the boundary. The more important step is maintaining the boundary. Maintaining the boundary is when you set a boundary to anyone, to an adult, they will test it because it's new. Well, are you serious? Maybe you're just moody. Do you really mean it? They will test it. And if when they test it, you are not enforcing it again, not harshly, not angrily, just say, hey, remember I asked you not to do that. Or, hey, remember I told you if you can't be on time to let me know because I'm only going to wait for 10 minutes, not the 20 that you expect. Or for a kid, if you do that once more, I'm going to have to go to your room or for a timeout or what have you, or you'll lose the toy and then you lose the toy. The maintaining the boundary is where the lesson is, not in setting it. The setting is an intention.
Yeah.
They don't know if you're following through. It's the follow through. That's critical. And people keep saying, well, I set boundaries, I'm done. No. You set boundaries, now the work begins.
I love that. Let that sink in. Anyone having a problem with maintaining boundaries, let that sink in. I love that so much. Thank you. That literally is exactly what I felt and what I've experienced as well. Okay. Before we share where people can go to learn more about your work, I've got one last question for you, please. My question goes like this. I want you to imagine now, please, Guy, that you are on the so-called world stage. Every sentient being alive has gathered, they're watching, they're listening and tuning into your message. When you're ready, take a breath and do share, sir. What is your message to the world right now?
Okay, my general message to the world is that this is a very complicated thing that you need to get more familiar with and that you need to take more control over. In other words, emotional health doesn't just happen. You need to make it happen by being proactive, aware, informed, knowledgeable. Unfortunately, emotional health takes work. There are no shortcuts. There's no easy ways to do it. You actually have to constantly monitor. Like, you look like somebody who works out. I'm somebody who works out. You invest in your physical health, invest in your emotional health, because that is going to improve your physical health too, but that's going to improve your quality of life more than anything else that you can do.
So it is. Awesome. Okay, guys. So again, if this has been useful, share it far and wide. We have a network of amazing people that we love, that are friends and community members and family members and so on and so forth. If this is relevant for them, if there's any topic that we've touched in loneliness or disconnection or separation or boundaries or anything that we've discussed here in terms of emotional health, in terms of psychological mastery, really, there's many principles here that are really, really amazing and important to live an incredible life, I believe, and share it far and wide, and do so as soon as this episode finishes, please. Okay. You want to learn more? It's GuyWinch.com. That is GuyWinch.com. That's GuyWinch.com. Same thing on Facebook, Guy Winch Author. On Instagram, Guy Winch, one word. And of course, you also had the opportunity to learn more at the Dear Therapist podcast. Guy Winch, it's been a privilege having you on the show today. Thank you so much for taking the time. Any final words?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for such thoughtful and I think important questions.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Maybe we'll get you back at some point, but for now, make sure that you, as you listen to this, you share it with as many people as you can. This has been useful. Mr. Guy Winch, everybody. Thank you so much.